You are not crazy. And if that sentence makes you pause for even a second, then something has already been done to you. Because people who were never manipulated do not need to hear that, but you do. Somewhere along the way, someone slowly taught you to question your own mind. They did not do it loudly. They did not do it all at once. They did it in small moments, quiet corrections, subtle shifts, until your confidence turned into doubt without you even noticing. You were told you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. Maybe you heard it so many times that it started to feel like truth instead of control. And here is the part that might sting a little. You did not just hear it, you started repeating it to yourself. You started apologizing for your reactions. You started shrinking parts of yourself just to keep the peace. Stay with me here, because what I am about to say is the part nobody told you. There was never anything wrong with you. You were not broken. You were studied. You were observed. You were chosen. Not because you were weak, but because you were open. Because you cared. Because you were willing to understand. And someone saw that as a door they could walk through slowly, carefully, until they were standing inside your life, telling you that you should feel lucky they were there. If this is hitting something real for you right now, do not just sit with it. Subscribe and stay here. Because what you are about to understand next will change how you see everything that happened to you. Here is the truth that shifts everything. This was never about your flaws. It was about their strategy. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. That is where your control begins. The part that kept you trapped was never what they said. It was how they made you feel when you tried to respond. That subtle hesitation in your chest, that moment where you started editing your own thoughts before they even left your mouth. That was not insecurity. That was conditioning. They did not take control all at once. They built it slowly, piece by piece, until you started participating in your own silence. And that is where everything begins to change, because once you see the pattern, you can break it. Most people think people like this just show up and chaos follows. But that is not how it works. They pay attention. They notice who listens deeply, who gives second chances, who explains instead of walking away. They do not chase power. They look for access. And once they find it, they do not rush. They settle in quietly like they belong there until one day you realize you are asking permission to feel something that used to be natural. Now here is where most people make the mistake that keeps the cycle alive. They try to win. They think if they can just explain better, prove their point more clearly, stay calmer, be more logical, then something will finally click. But nothing changes. Not because you are doing it wrong, but because the game was never about truth. It was about reaction. And every time you react, you feed the system that is draining you. So imagine what happens when that suddenly disappears. When the emotional response they expect is no longer there. No anger, no frustration, no visible shift in your face. Just stillness, just calm, just nothing they can grab onto. At first it feels unnatural, almost like you are betraying yourself. But then something strange happens. They start losing interest. Because what they needed from you was never your explanation. It was your energy. And without it, there is nothing left to control. If that realization is starting to land for you, do not just listen passively. Subscribe and stay with this, because the next shift is where you take your power back without raising your voice once. There is a moment you have probably experienced more times than you can count. Something feels off. A story does not quite line up. A detail changes. The logic twists just enough that you cannot follow it, but you also cannot fully call it out. And instead of questioning it, you go quiet. Not because you agree, but because you already know what happens if you push back. It turns into something exhausting, something circular, something that somehow ends with you apologizing again. Now imagine replacing all of that with one simple shift. You do not argue. You do not defend. You just ask calmly, almost curiously, can you help me understand that? And then you stop. You let the silence do the work. Because here is what they are not prepared for. Their version of events was built for speed. It was designed to overwhelm you before you could think. But when you slow it down, when you ask them to explain it step by step, it starts to fall apart in real time. Not because you expose them, but because clarity exposes everything by itself. And the most powerful part is this. You are not attacking. You are not escalating. You are simply refusing to carry confusion that was never yours to begin with. But there is a deeper layer that affects you long after the conversation ends. The part where you start doubting your own memory, where something that felt clear in the moment becomes blurry later. where you catch yourself thinking, maybe I overreacted, maybe I misunderstood, maybe it was my fault. That is not miscommunication. That is erosion. It is slow, it is quiet, and it is incredibly effective. So you begin doing something simple, almost invisible. You start writing things down. Not dramatically, not obsessively, just honestly. What was said, how it felt, what actually happened. And over time, something powerful returns to you. Your clarity, your sense of reality. Because every time you record your experience, you are telling your brain, this happened, this mattered, this is real. And once that foundation is strong again, the manipulation has nowhere to land. Now, here is something they never wanted you to rebuild. Your life, outside of them, the connections, the people, the parts of yourself that existed before they became the center of your attention. Because isolation was never accidental. It was built carefully through small comments, subtle doubts, quiet distance. Not enough to alarm you, just enough to separate you. So you start reversing that slowly. You respond to the message you ignored. You show up somewhere you stopped going. You say yes to something that has nothing to do with them. And it does not feel dramatic. It feels small, almost insignificant. But underneath that, something is shifting. Every new connection is a reminder that your world is bigger than the space they tried to confine you in. And that is something they cannot control. And then you reach the hardest part. The part that no one warns you about because it sounds so simple on the surface. You stop trying to make them understand. Not because you failed, not because you gave up, but because you finally see the truth. They understood all along. They just never needed to admit it. Every time you went back to explain, again, you were not chasing clarity. You were chasing closure. You were hoping that if they could just see what you felt, everything would change. But that hope is what kept you tied to them. Because as long as you needed something from them, they still had access to you. The moment you no longer need that something quiet but irreversible happens, the grip disappears. Not in a dramatic explosion, not in a final argument, but in silence, in peace, in the absence of that constant pull to explain yourself. And if you are still here listening, that means something inside you is already shifting. So stay with this. Comment, I see it now, if this is starting to click for you, because what you are recognizing is the beginning of getting yourself back. The moment they lose you is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not the argument you imagined 100 times in your head. It is quiet. And that is exactly why it is so powerful. Because they were never afraid of your anger. They were never afraid of your words. They were never afraid of you fighting back. In fact, that is where they felt the most in control. As long as you were reacting, explaining, trying, they still had access to you. They still had a way in. But peace is different. The moment you become truly calm, not pretending, not forcing it, but genuinely okay without their validation, something shifts that they cannot reach anymore. You stop waiting for the apology that was never coming. You stop replaying conversations that were never meant to make sense. You stop standing in front of a door that was never going to open. And you walk away, not in anger, but in clarity. That is the part no one tells you. Closure does not come from them. It comes from the moment you no longer need it. And maybe you are not fully there yet. Maybe part of you still wants answers, still wants fairness, still wants them to finally see what they did. That does not make you weak. It makes you human. But staying there is what keeps you stuck. So here is what I want you to take with you. You do not need them to understand you in order to move forward. You only need to understand yourself. If something in you feels different right now, do not ignore it. Subscribe, stay here, and keep going. And share this with someone who still thinks they are the problem. Because they are not. You were never too much. You were just giving it to the wrong person.